Let's talk about some more fun reasons. Well, I shouldn't say fun, but other reasons outside of your regular light criteria why people get a pleural effusion. No more transudates, exudates. There's quite a bit. If somebody's getting diuresed, then your lights criteria kind of not gonna identify your transudates versus exudates correctly. So personally, I usually look at something like a total protein in your serum versus your pleural fluid. If the gradient is greater than 3.1, then that's probably a transudate. If your albumin has a gradient greater than 1.2, it's a transudate. But let's talk about even more exciting stuff. What if, for example, your triglycerides are greater than 110? That's usually a chylothorax. But what if it looks like milk when it comes out and you get the test and the triglycerides are less than 110, but your cholesterol is over 200, especially if it's over 250? You're probably talking more about a pseudochylothorax. What if you take it out and it looks really, really green? You're like, this kind of looks like bile. Well, you can check a bilirubin. If the bilirubin in the fluid is greater than the fluid in the the serum, if the ratio is greater than 1.1, it's probably a bilothorax, and that could be for a variety of reasons. Let's say somebody has a history of trauma, multi-vehicle trauma, and you suspect that there might be a urinothorax. Well, what would you do there? You can actually check a urine, basically a creatinine in the pleural fluid. If that creatinine in the pleural fluid is higher than the serum, it's probably a urinothorax. Again, usually that's trauma one, or post-trauma, many years later, abnormal connections being made. What about some other more niche scenario? Well, there's ADA, adenosine deaminase. That would be if it's greater than 40. You're thinking something like tuberculosis-related pleural effusion. The easy ones, glucose, that's super low. That usually makes you think something like empyema, but it could also be a rheumatoid arthritis-related pleural effusion, and it can also be tuberculosis. What about interferon gamma? Now, this is a fancy one. So if interferon gamma is greater than 75, that's very suggestive in the pleural fluid that's actually tuberculosis. If you have a greater than 40 ADA and a greater than 75 interferon gamma, so both, that is very high sensitivity, very specific for tuberculosis-related pleural effusions. And some more extra niche things. You may have a ANA, right? You think maybe it's related to lupus. It's a lupus-related pleural effusion. You get an ANA and it's greater than 1 to 160, just the fluid, not in relation to the serum. It's pretty high sensitivity and specificity for lupus-related pleural effusion. If you compare it to the one in the serum and it's higher, it's a little bit less specific than just getting a 1 to 160 or higher in the fluid itself. There's other stuff that's a little bit more common. Let's say, for example, you think after doing some type of procedure, hey, maybe I think I got a hemothorax. It's looking like bloody murder. Well, you only need a hematocrit of 1% to make it look like bloody. But if you get it and it's more than 50% of the hematocrit of the serum, then it's probably a hemothorax. So let's say, for example, your hematocrit's 30, you get the pleural one, it's like 18, that's a hemothorax. What else? Last one would be, what if you notice that eosinophils in the cell count are greater than 10%? What are those eosinophils doing there? How'd they get there? Usually what happens is it's blood, and the blood irritates the pleura, and the eosinophils come to the rescue, and that's why they're there. So if you do a thora, and 2 days later you do another thoracentesis, and all of a sudden there's eosinophils there, it's probably from the blood that got released during the pleura. Maybe you got a little bit of a bloodier tap. Well, what about other stuff? Well, there's drug reactions that can give you eosinophilia in the pleural fluid. Again, it has to be greater than 10%. There's other type of, it's mostly drug reactions, but I hope this was enlightening us to like some of the more niche and outside of the usual transudate, exudate conversation, or is it a paramnemonic effusion? Nobody gets pH right, by the way. Usually you'd have to like get it immediately, and ideally in an ABG bottle, honestly, if you're gonna run it properly. Because if you get it into one of these little blood sample vials, if there's like heparin in there, by the way, if you put lidocaine into the pleural fluid while you were trying to draw it, then it's gonna mess with the pH completely, and you're not gonna get an accurate reading. So hope that helps. If you have any questions about pleural effusions or anything else, let me know.